Hi, everyone. On today's podcast to celebrate IBCLC Day, we're going to highlight and talk with IBCLC Nichelle Clark about supporting pumping parents in lactation.
Welcome to the Evidence-Based Birth Podcast. My name is Rebecca Decker, and I'm a nurse with my PhD and the founder of Evidence-Based Birth. Join me each week as we work together to get evidence-based information into the hands of families and professionals around the world. As a reminder, this information is not medical advice. See ebirth.com/disclaimer for more details.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ia Mystique Fao Dugun, pronouns they, she.
And my name is Rebecca Decker, pronouns she, her, and we will be your co-hosts for today's episode. Today, we are so excited here at Evidence-Based Birth to welcome Nichelle Clark to talk about supporting pumping parents while they're lactating. Before we interview Nichelle, I want to let you know that if there are any detailed content or trigger warnings, we'll post them in the description or show notes that go along with this episode. And now, Mystique will introduce our honored guest.
Nichelle Clark, pronouns she, her, is an international board certified lactation consultant, or IBCLC, wife and mother of one residing in Chesapeake, Virginia. She is the owner of Sunshine and Rainbows Lactation Services. Born and raised in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, Nichelle joined the United States Navy in 2010 and served honorably for 7.5 years. In 2020, she founded Black Breastfeeding 365, an organization that seeks to bridge the gap between Black parents and the lactation professionals who serve them. When she's not spending time with her husband and 4-year-old son, who is adorable, by the way, she serves as United States Lactation Consultant Association, or USLCA, advisory board member and Clinical Lactation Journal social media editor. In her spare time, she admins multiple online support groups for people of color, providing breastfeeding support and lactation education to her community. As an exclusive pumping mom herself, Nichelle is a champion for breastfeeding parents to write down their own rules and breastfeed their way. We are so thrilled that Nichelle is here at EBB on our podcast. Welcome to the Evidence-Based Birth Podcast, Nichelle.
Thank you so much. I'm so geeking out. I'm I'm so excited.
Yes, I'm so excited that you're here. So we know each other, but the listeners don't because I love Nichelle. You're gonna hear me say that a
Me
lot.
too.
I love what she does and what she's all about. But I want you to tell our listeners who may not know you about your journey into becoming an IBCLC.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much again for having me. I love evidence-based birth. I love everything. I listen to the podcast. The website is just absolutely amazing. And I use the content just all the time just to further my knowledge. I am very heavily into lactation, but of course, as we know, they're linked together. Birth and breastfeeding, chest feeding are one. If one is awry, then most likely the other one's going to be awry. My journey into lactation really came because I couldn't find anyone who looked like me to help me. And I mean that figuratively and literally. So I knew from 4 months pregnant with my son that I wanted to exclusively pump. Or I had this crazy idea about what if I don't put him to the breast and I just give him breast milk? Can I just do that? And I met with 5 IBCLCs, some of who are now my colleagues. And everyone was like, it's just not possible. It's not a thing. Sorry, you're never going to be able to maintain your supply here. This is not how it works. And I was like, why not? And Mystique, you know me very well, so I love a challenge. I love when someone says you can't do something. And I'm like, I'm not sure about that. So I, did my thing. I learned a lot. When I was pregnant, went ahead about my journey, and about 6 months in, I was like, you know what? Parents should be able to, surely I'm not the only person who thinks that they want to do it this way. And I was like, they should have lactation consultants that are like them. And then of course I am a Black woman. And so I live in Virginia, I live in Southern Virginia, and there are not a lot of lactation professionals of color, period, here. And so that was also, of course, a challenge for me and my new family. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be an IBCLC. I just made it. I was determined in my head, I'm going to do it. And then I started looking into it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much work. But I pressed through and it took me about 3.5 years. And now we are here. So I'm super excited. It's kind of my rags to riches Cinderella story about how I became an IBCLC.
And which path did you take?
I took
Nichelle?
Pathway 3. Yeah, I took Pathway 3. That's a good point. I don't have any sort of background in healthcare at all. I came from, I was in the Navy. My background is English and political science. Absolutely just nothing to do with healthcare. And so I wasn't qualified for Pathway 1 because I wasn't working as a nurse or a doctor, healthcare professional. We do have some peer counselor based programs here, but unfortunately, just the process of being certified and a lot of the politics and, issues that may come with, being a person of color in those spaces, that wasn't available to me. And then Pathway 2, we don't have a Pathway 2 program here. So Pathway 3 was kind of the pathway of least resistance for me. And it was very challenging. I had, at the end of my journey, when I submitted my hours, I had about 6 mentors. And I have a full-time day job. So I was working in corporate America, but my job allowed me to travel. So I was able to find IBCLCs that would mentor me when I would travel to different states. So I had like a mentor in Texas. I live in Virginia, but when I would travel to Texas, I would go and I would earn some hours under her. And I mean, it was a very slow process. So 6 hours here, 10 hours there. So yeah, I picked up hours here and there, piecemealing them together. I'm doing some virtual hours when COVID started, which was kind of like a godsend. COVID sucks, but being able to have that door open to do telemedicine and things like that and get those hours that way. I was getting hours on my West Coast time and East Coast time. So it was crazy, but I got my little 500 hours and I did Pathway 3.
And you did like a whole lot. Like
The
a whole
most.
lot. Like, I mean, I know the listeners don't know your journey like that, but I know what you went through, what you've been through, but you made it. And I'm
I
so happy you made it because we need you. We need more of you,
Thank
IBCLCs like
you.
you, especially, those who have your story, who have your experiences. May not be exact, but it's similar. It relates, it like aligns with a lot of just Black bodies saying, I was told, I don't want to, chest feed. I don't want to latch. I want to, pump. I want to bottle feed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was told that that's not going to work for you. That's not how this works. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very discouraging to hear that. Like I would say for me, like when I literally had to switch to pumping because I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this latching. I didn't get that support. I was like, it was very traumatic. And, folks were like, no, you have to put the baby to the breast. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I don't want to do that. And, just kind of repeating yourself, advocating yourself, you do that a lot. Definitely. You definitely make sure that parents advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
I definitely commend you on like your hard work and your journey and like your continued journey as well.
Thank you. Thank
So
you. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm a big proponent of presenting parents with all the options. I think a lot of times we start to undermine parents when we think that we know better for them. And so, for me as a lactation provider, it's kind of like I have this toolkit, I have a skill set that I, study and I learned about, and I have a skill set, and that is what I bring. I can't show up to your house, with my skill set and say, well, I'm only going to use these 4 tools in my toolkit. And so that kind of goes back to lactation professionals having to have pumping education in their toolkit, but giving parents saying, hey, listen, I got a whole toolbox right here. What we need? Okay, I need to use 37 tools, then that's fine. We can do that. And present parents with all their options and allowing them to make an informed decision on their journey. I always tell my parents, hey, you could say you want to pump today and then decide tomorrow you want it to latch or chest feed or breastfeed. Cool. That's fine with me because in my toolkit, that is what I have. If you decide that you want to latch, chest feed, breastfeed, it's not working, it's not working out for you and you want to switch to pumping, that's also in my toolkit. You decide that you don't want to breastfeed at all or chest feed at all, and then you decide a few months later that you want to, that's also in the toolkit. Like we can find a way to get you to where you want to be. I'm such a champion for parents and I tell them all the time, you let these people know that's, you let them know. We got a toolkit. Don't let them tell you they don't have the tools.
And I wanted to let our listeners know too, in episode 189 of the EBB podcast, we interviewed IBCLC Janiyah Mitnall-Williams, and Janiyah goes into a lot of detail about the different pathways to becoming an international board certified lactation consultant. So if that's a career you're interested in, go check that episode 189 out. And Nichelle, you said you did pathway 3. Janiyah talks a lot about pathway 2. So you can kind of hear about both options that way. What was your experience, Nichelle, as a pumping parent? You mentioned that you had this desire to pump for your child. And what did that experience end up being like?
It was absolutely amazing. This is the part of it that a lot of people don't talk about. It's kind of hush hush, but it was an absolutely amazing journey for me. They say that you lose a bond, and Mystique knows my son. He is so spunky and full of character, and we argue like an old married couple. He's my twin flame. He's my everything, and we had such a great bond. And so I want to start there. That a lot of times they think, oh, if you're just pumping, you don't have a bond with your baby. Absolutely not. I think that my bond with my child was strengthened because I was able to say, hey, like, I enjoy doing this thing for you. I enjoy this labor of love. It was rocky. I'm not going to, sugarcoat it. There were times where, I would sit up in my bed and I'd be like, this is just too much. Like, I'm tired. I'm overwhelmed. I have to wake up and feed this little human. I don't know what he wants. He's still crying. I'm trying my best, but my boobs hurt. My pump's not acting the way that it says it's supposed to act in the manual. I've had mastitis. It's a inflammation of the breast tissue. 5 times. That's kind of crazy and unheard of. But I've had it 5 times. But I did go on to breastfeed for 2.5 years. And it was absolutely amazing. It was just such a learning journey, learning about him, learning about me, but being able to have that empowerment to say, you know what, this is the way I want to feed my baby. And like, I'm doing it. Like, I'm going to do it. And so it was great. I had such a great time. I'm actually currently at the recording of this podcast. I'm currently pregnant, 9 months, ready to pop any moment. And we're going to go for round 2. So I'm super excited.
That's awesome. It's
I'm
cool to
excited about
hear
that.
positive story about pumping. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate you sharing that. When you became a pumping parent, how did that influence your role professionally? So what was your experience professionally as an IBCLC who had this experience?
Yeah. So when I was going through my kind of training process, I was really in the thick of it. And so not only was I learning about how to help parents do it, I was the parent who was actually doing it at the time. And so it was a little kind of hard to navigate, just finding time and space. Like if I was traveling, or if I was doing a consult, let me, pump before the consult, getting hours and learning that way. Let me pump before and try to store my milk and figure out a way to make that work. But also the other side of it is I have colleagues who are not necessarily advocates of that sort of thing, or they were kind of sort of the people that I encountered that told me it wasn't possible. So I'm in these spaces and I'm hearing people say things like, oh, pumping's not going to work, or, oh, don't work with that client, this, that, and the third. And I'm kind of sitting there like, hey, actually, I am here. It does work, and it's, it can be a thing. Just like Mystique, you were saying, they're telling you, oh, if you don't latch the baby, you're not going to have enough milk. I've never latched my son, my 4-year-old, ever. And my milk supply was plentiful. And I want to express to people that that's not a one-off. I'm not the exception or special in that way, that parents can absolutely do it. So it was really kind of tricky navigating that, being in a professional space, knowing what I was capable of, knowing what these parents are capable of, and not just me, because I'm in mom groups with other moms who are saying, yeah, we're doing it too. Like, maybe they're not trying to become IBCLCs, but yeah, we're doing it and we're making it work and we're writing our own rules. And I'm just kind of seeing these things with my mentor, Brenna Sampy, who is one of my mentors. She's an IBCLC. I got to experience my first trans lactation client. So that was like amazing. I mean, and it was just like so beautiful. I was just literally like, oh my, like I had to log off. I'm like, I'm crying. Like, it was just so beautiful to experience parents just being able to say like, this is what I am doing for me, and it's working. It's working. It doesn't have to look like anybody else's textbook example. It is working for me. So that was definitely one of the highlights of like my training. I love it.
Did you then, when you hear these negative people, naysayers, who are your colleagues? How have you grown in your ability to advocate for parents, especially parents of color, in their different journeys on breastfeeding or chest feeding?
Like I'm talking to you guys and I have on my super professional voice, but Mystique knows sometimes it enrages me a little bit. And I really have to check them, because I don't feel like that's the parent's job. And in my mind, when I hear them say these things, when I see them, type these things, it makes me enraged, because you'll say it to me, but they don't think of you as their colleague, as a parent as well. I'm like, hey, I'm still bearing children. I'm still, that is still my reality. And maybe you're past that, or maybe that's not your thing, but I'm still a parent. And so when I hear them say these things, I immediately like correct it. Like, I address it, I correct it, because I never want them to repeat it to a parent. I'm like, no, please don't ever say that. It's highly offensive, it's disrespectful, and it's just not supportive overall. So I do try to correct it gently most times, but sometimes I can get a little spicy with it, just because I want all parents to feel empowered in their, entire birth and feeding experiences, no matter what they choose to do. So.
And yes, I've witnessed your spiciness. I'm always for your spiciness because it's a lot of, I would say, crickets when it comes to advocating for parents who pump and not understanding that there are a variety of reasons why parents are choosing to pump and not latch the baby to their chest or breast. It could be just, they don't want to. It could be they experience trauma, and a lot of people in the area, in the field, I'm gonna be nice with my words as well, sweetness, they don't take that into consideration. It's very traditional, by the textbook type of thing. So I want you, if possible, because I know when it comes to evidence-based research, like, you're good for laying it down. I think the whole village in the lactation birth working field is good for laying down evidence-based information. But can you share with our listeners, like, what's it like just dealing with, like you said, with the lack of support and evidence-based education around pumping, especially for Black parents who
Yes.
want to pump? Like, what is that like? And I want the listeners to understand this, because not all pumping doesn't matter. All breastfeeding, chest feeding is not the same. They always say in the field, all bodies matter. And in reality, it doesn't. Is We're not the same. So when it comes to Black parents who are wanting to pump, can you, like, explain that to our listeners? Like, what's that like, working just professionally and personally? Like, what is that like as far as trying to show and prove evidence-based, research does matter when it comes to, pumping and advocacy, especially for the Black parents in our community?
Yeah, we were actually just having this conversation on Facebook not too long ago, when people were talking about, sharing those traditions. And so there comes a time where we do want to share the traditions. We absolutely want to get back to that, but we also want to look at the evidence and the research that we have in front of us, right? My grandma used to say, take the meat and spit out the bones. And so there's not a lot of research that exists around pumping parents. So you're kind of open to interpretation a little bit. When I say that, I mean, we know that you need 8 to 12 removals a day, right? You need to get an 8 to 12 removals a day, and you need to feed on demand. I actually got into this argument with someone not too long ago about on demand. You can also pump on demand. That's a thing. You can absolutely pump on demand with kind of the cycles that your baby feeds on. You can kind of look at it and say, okay, wow, during the day, we're at about every 2.5 hours. So you know what, maybe I should pump every 2 hours. So in that way, I'm, right ahead of the baby, and I have, food for them, milk for them. But you have to start sort of looking at these manuals. So with pumping, it gets a little tricky, because not only am I looking at, the physiology of it, of the parent, but now let's look at these machines and pumps. I do want to stop and say, there are medical devices. So the way that we hand them out to parents like candy, with no, sort of explanation on how to use them, no tips and tricks, no nothing, really, really scares me, because I'm looking at a parent and they're hooking up a medical device to their body with no sort of just idea of how it works or how it's going to affect them. And so it's kind of really hard, but you start to compile those things. I'm really big on following some of the protocols that we have out there. The Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine has one on milk storage. That is one of my favorites. My colleagues poking me a little bit, but we talk about, saving breast milk and how it's not fragile, storing it. I have parents who are working, whatever the reason that the parents are pumping, they're working, they are out of the home for whatever reason. I don't care if they want to get out of the home because they want to go and do cartwheels for 3 hours and want to be away from their baby. Like, it is what it is. But we are in a country, this is a, US based, I'm a US based IBCLC. And so we're in a country that doesn't offer paid maternity leave, or really any maternity leave. These parents have to get out here and they have to pump. So you want to have those resources for them. So I really just try to compile as much as I can, take the things that we have and interpret them for them. Hey, your milk is not going to expire at 2 hours and 1 minute. Like, it's okay. It's okay to kind of give yourself some of that grace, or, whatever the hour time frame is. And just have those resources for them, but also sharing them with my colleagues, because I can't touch everybody. That's the biggest thing. Is like, people are like, I want to send you clients. I'm like, no, no, no. I mean, yes, send me clients also, but you guys have to be prepared to help them too. If I'm not there, you got to give them the right pumping information too. So I try to just, keep as many resources as I can, read and stay up on the protocols, the latest research that's coming out, and then always ask those questions. Well, how does this apply to parents who are pumping? Because a lot of times they don't consider that. Hey, you guys did a study. Did you do any studies with any parents that are pumping? And of course, the answer is generally not. But it's kind of like, all right, I just want to plug your ear and let you know that the next time you go back and follow up on this study, you need to include parents who are pumping. So, it's a kind of a give and take, but they're getting there. I have hope for the lactation field one day that we'll get there, especially for Black parents, because y'all know I don't play about them. I don't play about anybody, but I really don't play about my Black parents. Just being a Black mom myself. So,
And the resource you touched on, providing resources and especially passing out pumps like candy, because that is a thing. And do you feel that more, I'll say, lactation professionals, because there are, breastfeeding peer counselors who, assist parents who want to pump as well. Do you feel like there are more lactation professionals just handing these pumps and these resources, like read the instructions, here's the resources, be about your way? Or are they at least sitting down with them, asking, do you have any concerns, giving them tips and tricks, or just like coming to the conclusion that, like you said, this is a medical device, and this can't just be passed out around all, as my one of my uncles used to say, all willy-nilly, but they can,
yeah.
so do you feel like that's being done more out, especially to the community, whether whoever's community, as far as, are there just, here's the pump, here's the instructions, here's some resources to look at, and here you go? Do you feel like they're doing that more so in the field?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of times, just like you said, that's what happens. Parents kind of show up. On a personal note, I remember when I knew I wanted to exclusively pump, and when I was at the hospital, I said, hey, can you guys make sure, on my tour, I had asked, what pumps do you guys have? Da, 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 just asking questions. And I asked if they could have a pump in my room. And, I was like, hey, can you guys send up the lactation consultant? Because I knew I needed to be sized for phalanges. That's the diameter of your nipple and the phalange breast shields that you use. And the lactation consultant came up, and she was kind of like, well, if you're going to pump, then I don't really need to be here. And that is an absolutely not okay demeanor to take, because, again, it's a device. And so you do see a lot of times, because parents are able to order them through their insurance, the insurances don't give them, of course, we know, insurance here in the US. They don't give them any guidance with that. So they're kind of leaning on their friends, or leaning on social media or the internet to kind of tell them what to do with this device. Their pumps range in all kind of prices. There's some very expensive ones on the market. I can think of a $500 pump right now, and parents will get it and order it and then don't really know what to do with it. They don't know if it works for them. And now they're stuck with this really, really expensive piece of medical equipment that we say should not be shared, right? We say, it's not safe to share those kind of things. Even if it is a closed system pump, it should be a single user if you're getting it from your insurance. And, now they're stuck with it, and these parents don't know what to do. And that absolutely affects the chest feeding or breastfeeding journey, because now I have this medical equipment that I can't use. I don't know what to do with it. No one's really here to tell me what to do with it or how to help me. They gave me some links to read online, but again, they don't work in this field, so they don't know what some of these words mean. I tell my colleagues all the time, you have to communicate with your audience. You have to understand who you're communicating with. If I'm working with another IBCLC as a client, I know that I can speak to them a certain way. If I'm working with a midwife as a client, I know that there's certain language that I can use that they will understand. That's not everyone. So we have to, really be clear with these parents and sit down with them, because, again, like, things get lost in interpretation. They could read a link, and I actually have a pump now. My personal breast pump, the manual's wrong. So if I go tell you to read the manual and the manual's incorrect, now you're just like, oh yeah, I'm totally using this medical device, right, with the wrong manual. And, you see that a lot. You see them just kind of being handed out willy-nilly, like you said, and parents don't know what to do with them. And then they stop breastfeeding, and they say, well, chest feeding didn't work for me. And you kind of had some missteps, and it's not on the parents. It's on the people who gave you a medical device without any sort of, explanation on how to use it.
I can think it would be really important. Like I'm thinking of like NICU parents,
Hmm.
a whole nother population where their babies really need human milk. It's like medicine for them, but their parents don't always get supported in like how to use the pump and, like you said, strategies. And I remember my first child, I think, was born before pumps were paid for by the Affordable Care Act. And I remember when that shifted and my second baby, I went and got a new pump and it was like the same model, but it worked so much better. And I realized that because I had pumped for several years with my first pump, the engine had like, whatever you call it, not the engine, you know what I'm
The
talking
motor.
about.
Yeah,
The
the
motor,
motor.
sorry. The motor had worn out. And that's why I was so struggling with my milk supply. And nobody had ever explained to me, like, if it's not making as loud of a noise or pumping as strongly, it's because the motor is dying. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
nobody explains something as basic as that.
Yeah, and there are parts on it that you have to replace. So I'll give you a little tip or trick. The valves create suction. And so all pumps have valves or membranes. And the valves and membranes create suction. Some pumps just have valves, some pumps have valves and membranes. And if you're pumping, when these pumps are designed, they're not designed for parents who are going to be doing heavy, I even say heavy duty pumping. And when I say heavy duty pumping, I mean, 4 or 5 times a day. If you're exclusively pumping, you could be doing 8 to 10. And so they don't say that necessarily in the manual. Some of the companies are getting better about it. They'll, put out resource links on their website. Hey, you might want to change these parts. But again, like you said, parents are just using it, thinking, okay, everything's great. No one's ever told me that if I'm not feeling a strong suction, maybe I need to look at some of these parts. Maybe I need to take it apart and, see what's going on. And then just like you said, you're like, wow, why is my milk supply going down? And parents internalize that, and that's the part that really grinds my gears, is that parents start to internalize that. They think there's something wrong with me. I'm not making enough milk. I'm not producing what my baby needs. I'm. And it's like, no, it's not you. Let's start placing the blame and shifting that blame back on where it belongs. And if it is the lactation community as professionals, I'm willing to accept that, because I feel like we need to shoulder that burden. I don't run away from that when people say, my lactation consultant never told me. I just apologize. I'm really, really sorry that you had that experience. I can't do anything to change it, and I know it wasn't me, but I know the type of care you deserve, and I know that you didn't get what you needed. And so we have to start shifting that burden back on these companies, back on these healthcare systems, back on these professionals, unfortunately, that are not providing these parents the support that they deserve and that they need, that we know. And that's the part that kind of gets me. It's like, we know these things. So we know we should be telling them better to help them out. But, they start to internalize it.
Like you said, it is a system problem too. And I think about, we got an email, evidence-based birth, a few months ago from an IBCLC who was a registered nurse as well, and just saying how like helpless and depressed they felt because they have so few IBCLCs for a huge healthcare system. And just goes to show you that the hospitals are not always prioritizing lactation support, and they staff the bare minimum number of IBCLCs where they can't possibly reach everybody and give everybody the support that they need.
Yeah, I did my part of my internship for my 500 clinical hours, and they have to be hands-on, hour minute for minute hours, meaning like if I was with you for 35 minutes, then I was with you for 35 minutes. I'm not going to just round up and say it was an hour. And I did half of it. I was lucky enough, as not being a healthcare professional, because normally that's not heard of, but I was lucky enough to do about half of it in a hospital. And I mean, they're seeing 27 parents in an 8-hour shift. And these parents have questions, and there's family in there. And then baby is tired, or baby is in the NICU, or waiting for baby to come back for testing. And, it's a rat race. And then you have one person, or you have two people. I think at the most, I was at a hospital that was saying they had 42 beds and for mother baby. And they still had to provide, some of the parents like, I don't know if I want to do formula. And a lot of them would say, oh yeah, I'll be fine if a lactation consultant comes by. But you have two people just to do that. And it's just absolutely like, there's no way you can touch everyone. There's no way that you can really spend the time that you need to, but you try your best. And just like you said, you feel hopeless because you're like, man, I really wish I could have spent 10 more minutes with that family. I wish I could have had 5 more minutes with that family. And then you send them out into the world. They discharge them, and then it's kind of like, think for yourself. Sink or swim.
I agree, because I'm not going to mention where I worked, but as a lactation professional, that's how it was. It was, you see the parents in the hospital, you do your rounds, you answer their questions, you go about your business. And leaving that room, I'm like, no, this isn't right. Like, and it's hard standing up, like, excuse me, this isn't right. This is not working. This is broken. And then when they come back for follow up, it's still broken. They, 9 times out of 10 are worse, in a worse condition than they were, and their milk is drying up. And like you spoke about before, they're like, oh, is it me? It's me. And it's the self blame. And, I was the, I guess the big mama type of energy to be like, baby, it's not you. It is the system. They didn't like that. I didn't go by the book. But I'm like, this is how you help parents. You can't treat these parents like they are a subject in a test book, or,
Yeah.
this is real life. These are real people. They're real lives. These are real families. And it's just amazes me. He's getting better. But then, and that was like, my son is 6. That was like 3 years ago. It's getting better. But then I was like, what is going on? Like, do y'all not care? Like, what is happening? So I'm glad you definitely touched on that. And like, I'm thinking back and hearing you, listening to you talk about your experience as a professional. Personally, I'm like, Nichelle was my IBCLC. Like, I wish she was IBCLC then, when I had my son, because I didn't get that support. I was that parent that I got a store-bought pump, and nobody told me, it's the pump, it's not you. It was literally, oh, it's because you're pumping. It's because you decided not to latch the baby anymore. And I'm like, huh? And that guilt just intensifies in me, and it set me into a very like deep postpartum depression, which got to the point that I stopped, nursing. I stopped pump because I was doing all three. I was doing all of it: formula, pumping, latching. I was doing all of it. The cup, I was doing everything, like doing the most, as I say. And it got to the point where it wore me out. It was exhausting. And like, I stopped at 7 months because I gave up. I was like, I can't do this anymore. Instead of
Yeah.
somebody encouraging me and not guiding me like you do, Nichelle, for everybody, and
Oh.
not debunking, the myths that are out there about pumping. So, like, for those who don't know or who need to know when it comes to pumping, like, what are like at least 3 myths? Because I know you are good for like you are good for checking, as I say, checking, collecting, correcting folks who just provide wrong information, just steering people the wrong way. So, what are like 3 top myths you want to share with our listeners when it comes to pumping?
Yeah, so my favorite one, I'm actually wearing a shirt. If you're watching this, it actually says pumping is breastfeeding. We didn't have enough space for chest feeding on here, character wise, but that's definitely the number one myth, is that it's not, is that pumping is not chest feeding or breastfeeding. It's the same way where they're like, a C-section birth isn't birth. Like, what are you talking about? A human came out, it's a birth. It's the same thing. And if you look at the definitions on Webster's, you look at the definition by the World Health Organization, human milk feeding. If your baby is getting human milk and it's coming from the breast or the chest, it is breast or chest feeding. That is the source. That's the provenance. That's where it's at. That's where it's coming from. So that's the biggest myth that I hear a lot of times. And I hear parents say it all the time. And I always, encourage them and correct them and they'll say, well, I'm not breastfeeding, I'm pumping. No, you're breastfeeding. I'm not chest feeding, I'm just using a pump. No, you're still chest feeding. Absolutely you are. And giving them their power back. You don't have to, be a certain subset. I hate that we create that division in all of human milk feeding. Like, hey, no, we're all going towards the same common goal here. So that's definitely a big myth. The second one I would say is that pumping, a lot of people say pumping isn't sustainable. It's unsustainable. It's unsustainable for parents to maintain these schedules. It's actually not. If you support them and provide them with the resources that they need, it's absolutely sustainable. And I think we undermine these parents' will. We undermine, just their sheer heart in it. If you give them the tools, hey, this is how you do it. This is how I can help you. They can absolutely sustain it. I mean, I went on to do it for 2.5 years, and I'm not that special. Like, I'm not like a superwoman or anything. I see parents who, go longer, who feed multiples, who feed twins, who are feeding maybe an older child breast milk and a younger baby breast milk or chest milk. So it's absolutely sustainable. Just like you, Mystique, I was told I called to schedule my son. He was born the week of Thanksgiving. So we had to call the pediatrician and do a special thing to say, hey, when do we bring him in? Are you guys open on Black Friday? He's born that week. And so they say, no, come the next week. And they're asking me some questions about him, new infant. Let's just, get some information down. If the doctor thinks it's a big thing that you need to meet that 48 hours, we will. And I was calling, and then the nurse was like, "Oh no, sweetheart. I was like, well, I'm pumping his milk," and she's like, "Well, okay, but you know that if you don't latch him to the breast, you're not gonna have a supply. Your milk is just gonna go away after 3 months." And it was just so like, okay, thanks for that wrong information. It's kind of keep going with this conversation, but a lot of people just think it's unsustainable, and when you ask them why, they have absolutely no evidence, no research behind it. They just pull that out of thin air. So that's definitely one of the myths that I definitely want to debunk. And let's see. I don't know. I think kind of going back to what I said at first is that you can't have a bond with your baby if you're pumping. That's really taught a lot. It's absolutely the most crazy thing that I ever think, because I think like you grew a human, and even if you didn't, even if you adopted and you're inducing lactation, this is your person. I watch a lot of Grey's Anatomy. This is your person. This is your little person. And like, absolutely, you can do whatever it is that you put your mind to with that person. You can have a bond with that person. I have bonds with friends, people who are like family to me that, we don't share the same kinship or same bloodline. I always call Mystique my kindred. Like, that's my kindred right there. Like, that is my family. So of course you can have bonds with people like that. And, we don't have to rack them and stack them. Oh, it can't be this. And we kind of want to play these oppression Olympics in breastfeeding. Oh, I'm better because I did it this way. I'm better because I did it this way. I always have a saying, there's love in every drop. Nobody chest feeds or breastfeeds because they want to be better than someone else. They're doing it for their little person or their little people. So definitely want to debunk the myth that you don't have a strong bond with your baby if you don't put them to the chest or the breast. It's absolutely hogwash. Or that they're not attached. Like, people say that all the time. Like, oh my gosh, chest fed babies, breastfed babies are going to be like super clingy, and they're going to be that way because they're children. I never latch my son to my breast or chest ever. And he's on me just like a second skin right here all the time.
Same for mine. That
Yeah.
ooh, I love them. We love
Yeah.
them, but goodness,
Exactly.
that debunks the myth that they are they're not
I'm just
attached.
like, what? He is attached to me like Velcro. So like, I don't know what you're talking about, but yeah, this is crazy, crazy myth.
Nichelle, I want to circle back to something you said in the beginning about how your experience was wonderful, but there were also difficult moments. And I know for myself, like when I went back to work, I had to pump for all three of my children for about a year. And it was really hard. And it was one of the things I was really glad when my childbearing years were over. So I was wondering if you could help us, those listeners who may be struggling with the difficulties of pumping. And like, do you have any positive affirmations or ways of reframing, or maybe like advice for where they can go to get help, because maybe it's not them, like we were saying, maybe it's the pump or the lack of
Yeah.
support.
I definitely always talk to my colleague when I talk about pumping. I say, do not send your clients into hostile environments. That's traumatic. And so if you are struggling with that, there are a lot of good online groups. I admin a few Facebook groups. I have a group for Black moms, Black Breastfeeding Mamas Circle. All Black parents are open and welcome to join it. That's just kind of how the name fleshed out. But finding your community and your people, I think, is a really good way. I know online support groups can be kind of brutal, but kind of just join around and just look around and see if these are kind of your people that'll support you and kind of build you up. I struggled a lot with just not knowing if I was doing the right thing, right? I didn't have a me in the field at the time or around me when I was doing it. So, I didn't know. And those pressures start to sink in when, my baby is sick. And is it because I'm not latching him? Is the reason that my breasts are inflamed and my tissue is inflamed because I'm not latching? That's just like Mystique said, that's the first thing they go to. Oh, it's because you're not nursing, you're not latching. And it's kind of like, am I doing the right thing? Even now, as a lactation professional, I laugh all the time. For my second baby, I have my own lactation consultant. So I hired someone to help me through the journey. Even knowing what I know, it's kind of like, okay, can I do this? Am I doing it right? Do I have the right tools that I need? Is there something that I'm missing? So I would definitely say finding your people. while I love being in IBCLC, and I think IBCLCs are like awesome, it's the best career in the world, everyone doesn't need an IBCLC. And that's why we have, like Mystique said, we have peer counselors, we have breastfeeding specialists. There's a lactation professional for every budget, for every kind of demographic. So I would definitely, just encourage people to kind of reach out, and ask any questions. If you find me on social media, if you would like a lactation consultant that's maybe, I don't know, a different ethnicity because that's your ethnicity, or your different religion practices, things like that, spiritual practices, I can absolutely, hey, I reach out to a client, and just kind of finding your people. But just to know that, you are doing your best. I always say love in every drop. There is literally love in every drop of breast milk. And also, one thing that's random is like, if you choose not to chest feed or breastfeed, that's completely fine too. I think a lot of parents, I've worked with parents who kind of just need that permission to quit. I'm not going to say permission because you can't give them permission, but they need that support. When it becomes emotionally, mentally, and physically detrimental, as a lactation professional, I have to know when it's time for me to say, hey, listen, in the toolbox is also the option to pack up this whole toolbox and just be done. And no one's gonna look at you differently. I don't feel no type of way. I have people who I've been halfway through a consult with a client, and I've been like, you don't want to do this, do you? And they're like, no, they start crying. I'm like, it's okay. You're not. I'm not offended. I'm not offended. I don't feel any type of way. I'm not the breastfeeding police. I'm not the chest feeding police. I'm not gonna come to your house and be like, you must give that baby human milk. But just having people that will support you. I'm always cool with firing people. I like to fire people. So like, if your lactation professional isn't working for you, also you can fire them. I'm not offended. I always tell my clients this all the time. If we get through the consult and you decide that you don't want to work with me anymore, like, please, I can give you 3 references. I promise. I am not offended, because maybe it's not a good fit. So definitely just finding your people that are going to support you and build you up in your journey. You deserve that. You are worth that. And if that's not happening for you, like, the first indication that you get is something wrong. Your spidey senses start going off. Okay, thank you very much. And it doesn't have to be a nasty thing. Thank you very much, and move on and kind of find someone that's your people and your tribe.
I love it, Nichelle. Thank you so much for all the wisdom you've shared with us today, and the stories and explanations. We really appreciate it. Do you have any resources or projects you'd like to share with our audience? I know you mentioned your consulting, but is there anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah. So you can follow me on social media. I am on Facebook and Instagram at Sunshine and Rainbows Lactation. So that's Sunshine SON, because I have a little boy. He's my sunshine, light of my life. And then Rainbows, I'll give a little backstory on that. He's actually a rainbow baby. So we had some previous losses before we had him, and then he was our little sunshine. Drives me crazy. Love him to death. But SON, Shine and Rainbows on Facebook and Instagram. I also work with a few online breastfeeding support groups. So there's Black Breastfeeding Mamas Circle. We also have a group for moms and parents of toddlers. Again, it says moms, but all parents are encouraged and welcome to join. And then I have a good friend of mine. She's a CLC, that's a certified lactation counselor. Her name is Jamaica Brown. She's based in New York, and we actually do a donation group, a facilitated peer support donation group for parents. So for parents of color. So if you are a parent of color, Afro-Latina, African-American, of color, you can join the group and find other parents of color who are donating and sharing milk. So that's a really good thing. Human milk sharing gets kind of nasty. There are a lot of nasty little politics in it. And of course, deep-rooted pain and trauma in this country, in the United States, behind that with parents of color. So you can definitely find us there, donation support group on Facebook. Breast milk donation for Black moms. And find us there. Anything else I'm working on? I'm working on a few things. Just follow me on social media. You'll see. Yeah, I have some educational offerings. I work with LER, which is Lactation Education Resources, and I did their induced lactation and relactation, which I got to include some of Mystique's amazing Black birth healer content for that. She was so wonderful to let me include that.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful for that. I love that. Like, I get to that slide, and then it gets really real. I'm like, I know we did all the formalities, but also watch the way you speak, watch how you're talking, okay?
Exactly.
So I do their relactation and induced lactation, and that is for parents who are kind of doing non-traditional ways. Induced lactation is when you're just bringing a milk supply to fruition that wasn't there. And then relactation is if you ever chest fed or breastfed before and you're bringing your milk supply back. So that can apply to all kinds of parents, And then, yeah, that's just pretty much it. Pretty much what I got going on. Birthing a whole human. Trying evidence-based birth a whole human into this world. So
I
we'll
was going to
see.
say, yeah, birthing a human is a big project.
Yeah.
So growing and birthing one.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Nichelle. As always, it is a pleasure. I love you so much. This has been an awesome talk. And if you guys would like to rate this podcast, please do so on all the podcast platforms of Evidence-Based Birth and give us your feedback. Let us know how we're doing, what you'll like to hear more of, all those great things. And again, we thank you so much, Nichelle, for coming by and just sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your energy with not only us, but our listeners for EBB.
Thank you so much for having me.
This podcast episode was brought to you by the book Babies Are Not Pizzas, They're Born Not Delivered. Babies Are Not Pizzas is a memoir that tells the story of how I navigated a broken healthcare system and uncovered how I could still receive evidence-based care. In this book, you'll learn about the history of childbirth and midwifery, the evidence on a variety of birth topics, and how we can prevent preventable trauma in childbirth. Babies Are Not Pizzas is available on Amazon as a Kindle, paperback, hardcover, and Audible book. Get your copy today and make sure to email me after you read it to let me know your thoughts.